Hi Silvadies, welcome again to my channel. My name is Joy. If you're new here on this channel, I teach dressmaking, pattern making, sewing DIYs and how to make money off of your sewing skills. If this is something you're interested in and do enjoy watching, please kindly subscribe to this channel and join our growing sewing community. Today's tutorial is on how to make this two-piece loungewear. As you can already tell, the selling factor on this design is the decorative piping on the sleeve, the collar, the button stand, the center back, the pockets, and the short hem. It also has a back vent on the shirt, which I love so much. Without too much sherence, let's get right into the business for the day. To recreate this design, I'll be using an Ankara fabric of 3 yards and a yellow bias tape to contrast the color of my fabric for the bias piping decoration. You will also need a chalk for marking. I initially wanted to use a zipper for this shot, but then I changed my mind and I used an elastic instead. You will need a tape measure for taking measurements and of course your scissors. These are the measurements you would need for the top. Take measurements for your full length, bust, shoulder, sleeve length and back half length, which is the level where our back vent will start. For the shorts, take measurements for the full length, the hip circumference, the waist circumference, hip depth and the crotch depth. In this video, we'll be focusing on the cutting and stitching of the top, and in the part 2 coming immediately after this, we will deal with the shorts. Alright, now the first thing I've gone ahead to do here is to fold my fabric into 2 to start cutting the front. To get the width of the fabric needed, add 4 inches to your bust measurement and then you divide it by 4 inches. In my own case, that would be 38 plus 4, which is 42 inches. Then I now went ahead to divide it by 4 again and it gave me 10.5 inches. Now go ahead and add 4 inches for the lapel and then 1 inch for the side seam. So that would be 10.5 plus 5 and it will give you 15.5. That is exactly how I came about 15.5 inches width. After that, I marked 3 inches for the lapel space and I drew that vertically along the length of my pattern. Next, I measured the full length of my shirt and then I added 2.2 inches for the hem. I marked the length and then I drew it across. Going back now to the lapel space to draw the lines vertically. Now the next thing I did is to mark my shoulder, which is 17 divided by 2, giving me 8.5 inches from the vertical line. I used a shoulder length longer than my original shoulder. This vertical line now will now serve as our center front. Then I came down 1 inches from the shoulder slope and I marked 10 inches for the armhole. This now means that by the time I draw out the shoulder slope, my armhole is down to 9 inches. I used 3 inches for my front neck depth and 9 inches for where the lapel will stop. I used 3 inches for the neck width. Then I drew my neckline, linking these 2 points with a curved ruler, and then I drew my shoulder slope. After that, I marked 1 inch from the 9-inch lapel depth to accommodate the buttons, and then I just drew out my lapel space to that 9 inches mark. This particular lapel space is called the clover lapel. I drew that 1 inch mark down the length of the shirt. I extended my shoulder down to the armhole level and drew a straight vertical line across. And with my French curve, I'm drawing my armhole. Next on, I divided my bust by 4 and I added 1 inches for the side seam. Remember, I added extra 4 inches to my bust because this shirt has a loose fit. And then I started marking it from the new center front. Mark this down the whole length of your shirt and draw a vertical line. Now it's time to cut out the pattern. I went ahead to notch the point where the lapel will meet with the collar. Now moving on to the back, which is pretty straightforward. I placed the front piece on it, but without the extra 3 inches lapel space. I included the 1 inch button stand for the back vent, and then I used 1 inch for the back neck width, neck depth, as against the 3 inches we used in front. After that, just trace out the outline of the front like you're seeing me do. The next thing I'm doing is to cut out the facing of the lapel and the button stand area for the front pattern and extend it up to 2 inches on the shoulder. I ironed an interfacing on the wrong side of the facing to give it a little bit of structure. Now to cut my sleeve, I first of all measured out the armhole of my shirt and it gave me 11 inches. I folded my fabric into two to measure 20 inches. Then I folded it again. The length of my sleeve is 12 inches and I added an extra half inch below to sew the sleeve hem that will be bearing the piping, and also half inch above for joining it to the shirt. For my round sleeve, I used 9 inches, which when open will now give me 18 inches. So for the top of the sleeve, I went in by 3 inches and I came down on the side by 3.5 inches. Remember, this is a freehand pattern cutting. Then I linked these 2 points with a curve. With my hand, I just linked it like so. And then I measured the curve to make sure that it is 11 inches so as to correspond to the armhole measurement. And then I linked the point to the points at the hem of the sleeve. Now it's time to cut out my sleeve. I notched the midpoint of my sleeve just to identify the center line. After that, I measured the hem width for the cutting of the hemband. Here it gave me 18 inches, so I'll be cutting a fabric of 18 inches by 5 inches. After that, I folded the fabric and gave it a very good press. Here is my facing already placed right sides to the right side of my front piece. Now I'm bringing in the bias, fold it like this and iron it flat. So you're going to fold your bias on fold, more like opening it up and then folding it on fold, and then you iron it flat. Then sew it to the front piece round the lapel and button area. Now I started 1 inch above the center front notch, that notch I made when I was cutting out my pattern. If you're a complete beginner, to make this very easy to sew and come out neat, please mark 0.5 inches around the area where the piping will be sewn and follow that line when you're stitching. I folded the edge of the facing and then sewed it to avoid any rough edge. This is the bias stitch on that 0.5 inches line that I marked. Now when I got to that notch, I stitched it in such a way that it was blended out just at that notch point. Now I'm sewing the facing to the front piece at the lapel and the button area, sandwiching the bias binding in between to stitch it from the piping. Stop at the notch at the neck, so you don't sew all through around the neck, just stop at the notch at the neck. For the back piece, remember we added 1 inch at the center back. That is what I'll be using as seam allowance at the back, and for good reason. Now I measured out 15 inches from the shoulder to indicate the start point of my back fence. Going in with my bias just like we did for the front, iron it flat on fold, and then I started sewing exactly 1 inch above that 15 inches mark for one side of my back piece. Now after stitching and ironing, this is what it looks like. Now moving on to the other part of the back piece, I started sewing the bias from the neckline all the way down to the hem. After sewing, it's now time to join the two pieces together. Stitch it down with the 1 inch seam allowance, which is also the line where the bias is sewn, and then stop at your 15 inches mark. After that, I give it a very good press. To finish up the back's rough edges, you can either serge it or just fold it like we did for the edge of the facing and iron it flat with a hemming gum. Next on, I've joined the back piece to the front piece at the shoulder. I did a French seam, and then for the collar, I've gone ahead to measure round the neckline, starting from the notch on one side of the front piece all the way round to the other side. Mine is 19 inches, as you can see, that is 9.5 inches on half. Fold your fabric into 4 to be as wide as half of the collar length that you just measured out plus 1, and then make the length 7 inches. From the edge of the fabric at the fold part, I marked 5 inches, which is going to be the width of my collar plus the seam allowances for stitching on both sides. Then I curved it slightly upwards and measured to 9.5 inches, which is half of what we measured plus ½ inch seam allowance, making it 10 inches. After that, I came down 5 inches at an angle to meet the edge of my fabric, and then I marked it round like this so that my 5 inches width will be consistent all through the length of that collar. After that, I drew out a curve at the edge for the clover design we are going with, and then I cut out my pattern piece. Now this is what it looks like when it's opened. I'm gonna head to iron my interfacing on the wrong side of my collar for both pieces just to give it structure. Here I'm marking out 0.5 inch round the collar for where the piping will go, as well as the joining of the two pieces of the collar. I've sewn in the bias binding just like the other pipings we did. Then I stitched it together with the second piece. Now after turning and pressing it over, this is what it looks like. Now when sewing, make sure to leave a 0.5 inches on both sides of the collar so that you can easily stitch it to the neckline. After that, sew in your collar starting from one notch all through to the other notch. Now fold the other part of the collar to cover the rough edge. After that, it's now time to join the sides of our shirt. I did a French seam, but you can do otherwise if you have a serger. For the sleeve, after ironing the band, I sewed it to the hem of the sleeve, right side facing the right side. Remember, you have to cut out a band for the sleeve which is 5 inches by the length of that sleeve. So I've gone ahead to fold it on fold and then iron it, and then sewed it right side facing the wrong side of the sleeve, gave it a good press again, and then flipped it to the right side, and then sewed in my bias for the piping. Next, I stitched the sides of the sleeve using a French seam, just like I just did for the shirt, and then I joined it to the shirt. Now moving on to the pocket, I cut out a fabric 10 inches by 8 inches and 8 inches by 5 inches for the pocket band, just like we did for the sleeve. I ironed the band flat on fold, and then I stitched it right side facing the wrong sides of the pocket, and then flipped it to the front, gave it a good press, and then sewed the bias binding for the piping. It's time to place it on the shirt. To know the exact position to place it, start 1 inch above your half length. So if your half length is 16 inches, your pocket should start at 15 inches line. Fold the sides and the bottom and then stitch it down, leaving only the top part open. After this, I folded my hem, created my buttonhole and sewed my button. All this I did off camera. Now this is what the final look like. I hope this tutorial was really worth your time. I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't done that already, so that you get notified whenever I upload new videos. The part 2 of this two-piece is already on the channel. Do well to watch it for the complete look. See you soon. Bye.